Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the crossover series in which I try to answer the question: if Shaman King characters played Yu-Gi-Oh, what decks would they use? I already did a video covering the main players of the show, and now it's time to turn our attention to the villains and antagonists. And as always, I'll be basing my choices mostly on the powers and abilities the characters have in their own show, and also their spirit allies. And let's start with House right hand man, Luchist Lasso. His spirit ally is Lucifer, and like all the other angels, it's another transformer, whose true form is a Lamborghini Countach LP400. It's also the first of the archangels and possibly the strongest one. And in contrast to the other angels, it's black instead of white, symbolizing Lucifer's status as a fallen angel. So for him I've chosen the Dark Lords deck, a deck of high level dark fairy monsters, and their gimmick is for their monsters to target their spells and traps in their graveyard and copy their effects, after which the spells and traps are shuffled into the deck. And there's also a Lucifer inspired card in the deck called Dark Lord Morningstar, and there's also the card Lightbringer Lucifer, which fits nicely into the deck since it's a dark fairy monster. Next is another prominent member of House faction, Mohamed Tabarsi. His spirit ally is Jinn, and just like a genie, it lives in a lamp that's been passed down in Mohammed's family for generations. And with the glass jewel on his palm as a medium, Mohammed can use his oversong to fire a laser beam from it, or materialize Jinn himself, giving him a wish which he then must follow. But he only gets a limited number of wishes per day, and for him I picked a deck whose boss monster looks the most like a typical genie, which is Zushin the Sleeping Giant. And this monster can only be special summoned by tributing a monster with 10 Zushin counters on it. And since it is also the only card that can put Zushin counters on other cards, and can do it only once per turn, it takes a while to set up. But once you do, it's unaffected by card effects, and it can't be run over in battle, so it's pretty hard to get rid of it. However, it is not a hard once per turn, so it's not impossible. Anyway, this is a deck I found on YouTube by a user named Mae, which can pump out 3 Zushins in one turn. It was kinda impressive to watch actually, so I'll leave the link to the video in the description so you can check it out for yourself. After him we have his teammate Zang-Ching, and his spirit ally is the spirit of a panda bear called Xion, and he uses the gong that was Xion's favorite toy as a medium, which gets Xion's face and claws when possessed by his spirit. And he throws the gong around to attack his enemies with the said claws, and it can even cause an explosion. So for him I picked a deck focusing on Gyakugire Panda, which is a deck from the Edison format of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's kind of a OTK and burn deck hybrid. And considering he uses both physical attacks and a freaking explosion, I think this fits him just right. And the final member of Team Tsukigumi is big guy Burton, who is a former professional football player and the only surviving member of his team after a terrible accident. And his spirit partners are all the other members of his team. And by channeling them in his football, he can materialize them and attack his enemies with attacks based on football plays. And this was a no-brainer. For him I picked the UA deck, UA being short for Ultra Athletes, and it's a deck themed all around sports, including some football related cards. And their main gimmick is tagging out monsters on the field for ones in the hand, like switching players in a game. And now let's take a look at Team Tsuchigumi, starting with the BoZ Brothers, which are a duo of monk rock musicians, and they use a bunch of small spirits of animals, birds and insects that cannot remember their original forms, called Chimimorio, using small rocks as a medium and using their music to control them. And their main tactic is to swarm their opponent with a bunch of Chimimorio spirits. So for them I picked the Duston deck, which are a bunch of dust imps similar to Chimimorios and the pebbles they use as a medium, and their main strategy is also to swarm the field. On your opponent's side, that is. And when they are destroyed, your opponent then gets the negative effects they get when they are destroyed. So they are also as pesky as Chimimorios as well. Then we have Peyote Diaz, a Mexican shaman who is also a mariachi musician. And he uses the spirits of his fellow mariachi bandmates who all died in meaningless fights. And he also controls his oversong with his guitar. And his medium are the Mexican calavera dongs. And his most powerful oversong, Grande Fantasma, uses a giant Falas Dong as a medium, and requires all of his spirits to control. So because of that, I picked a Fluffle and Frightfur deck for him, since there's still not a mariachi archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Get to it, Konami. But yeah, since his oversong consists of controlling puppets, and the Frightforce are kinda aesthetically similar to the Calavera dongs, that's why I picked the archetype. And I also put in a copy of Pendulum Mucho for that mariachi flavor. Next we have the walking Lego that is Brocken Meyer. And true to his appearance, he uses Lego blocks to form his Oversoul. And those blocks are the medium for his spirit allies, which is a pack of rats. And he controls them to form the blocks into various shapes, like a dinosaur or a tank, or whatever else he desires. So for him I have a deck consisting of some rat cards, and some other beast support cards, and also the block cards, which are rock types, but they are also generic earth support, which the rest of the deck is, so they're not completely out of place in the deck. And the final half follower for this video is Boris Tepes Dracula. And that name should tell you exactly what he's all about. He's a Romanian shaman that uses blood as his medium, both his own and his opponents. He uses vampire bat spirits to transform his blood into a cape when he's out of battle, but in battle he can also transform it into vapor, spikes and clothed wings. And when he bites an opponent, he uses their blood as a medium for his other spirit, the vampire hunter Blaumro, which possesses them so he can control them. So yeah, this is another no-brainer, he gets the vampire deck. I mean, he even looks like Vampire Scarlet Scourge, just look at them. And the vampire deck functions similar to his abilities. They can inflict damage to their life points to activate their effects, but they can gain them back by doing battle damage. And also if they destroy a monster in battle, they can take control of it after the battle phase. So I'd say that's a perfect match. Next let's cover the team of Egyptian shamans, Team Niles. Starting with their leader, Anatel. He is the descendant of an ancient Egyptian king and controls the spirits of 10,000 slaves. And with his Oversoul, he can sprout wings and rain feathers of his Furioku on his opponents, which damage them from the inside out. And this attack was modeled after King Tutankhamun's curse. So for him I chose the Horus deck, which centers around the card King's Sarcophagus, which prevents your Horus monsters from being destroyed by effects that don't target them. And when they battle an opponent's monster at the start of the damage step, it sends that monster to the graveyard, which also kinda reminds me of King Tutankhamun's curse. So I think the deck is a nice fit for Anatel. Then we have his teammate Khafre, who is considered by Anatel to be the best embalmer ever. And we don't know much about his abilities, since he was taken out before he can use any, but we know his spirit ally is Kitka, an ancient Egyptian warrior which was buried with her pharaoh to protect him in the afterlife, and his medium is her mummified remains. And because of that I picked the Grey Keeper's archetype for him, since in the lore they also protect the tomb of their pharaoh, and their main gimmick is to prevent your opponent from interacting with his graveyard, which is accomplished with their field spell Necro Valley, and pretty much every card in the deck is reliant on having Necro Valley on the field. And finally for Team Niles is Nakht, and he was also taken out before he can really showcase any of his abilities, but we know he uses a Scarab Spirit, and his medium is the pyramid helmet he always wears, and according to Anatel he has the greatest pyramid power, whatever that means. So for him I chose the Tyramid archetype, which is all about pyramids, and their main gimmick is cycling through their 3 field spells, which can easily be accomplished using their monster's effects, which send one field spell you control to the graveyard and activate a different one from the deck. And the field spells also have additional effects when they are sent to the graveyard. And the final antagonist team I'll be covering is Team Iceman, starting with their leader Pino. Pino is an Irish shaman and a druid, whose guardian ghost is Budb, the Irish goddess of war. He channels her spirit into the shepherd's crook and uses her power to drain the heat out of any object or area, usually using it to freeze water so he can use the ice for the attacks. And since his spirit usually takes the form of a crow, for him I have a deck that's a mixture of the blizzard monsters, which are winged beast monsters, and some other ice-themed monsters. Next is Zria, the Russian shaman who uses the water spirit Vodnyanoi. She uses her shamanic drum as a medium, and with her spirit's abilities she can condense the moisture in the air and use the gathered water for her attacks, usually in combination with Pino's abilities. And since her spirit can control water and looks like a giant frog, for her I chose the frog deck, along with the Paleozoic archetype, which is probably the strongest form of the deck. And it's an Xyz focus deck that special summons a bunch of level 2 aqua monsters and then goes into some powerful rank 2 monsters. including the aptly named Totally Awesome. And the last member of Team Iceman is, and get ready for this, Tona Papik Cadimahide, who is an Icelandic shaman, and his spirit ally is a Viking Kong Nakht, and he uses his Viking helmet as a medium for his oversoul. And his oversoul can take the form of a suit of armor with a giant axe or even a rowboat, which can be used in combination with his teammates' abilities. And the most similar thing to Vikings I can find in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the Plunder Patrol deck, who are a bunch of pirates, and their ships are designed to look like Viking ships and also have Viking names. And the main gimmick of the deck is to special summon their extra deck monsters and equipping other monsters to them as equipped spell cards, which give them additional effects. And that's it for this episode of the Yu-Gi-Oh! And Shaman King crossover series. But there are still a lot of Shaman King characters I didn't cover, so I'll probably make another one of these. Be sure to let me know if there are some decks I missed that would be good for the characters I covered in this episode. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye!